2, 1. Hi, my name is Lowell Joseph Gallin, and this is Lowell's Show, my private YouTube channel where I do interviews. I haven't done an interview since August 2019, and I'm very happy that my guest is Gilad Atzmon, who's in England's green and pleasant land in London, I think. And as Dr. Johnson said to Samuel Boswell, he who grows tired of London has grown tired of life. Would he say it with what happened last few years in London? I don't know. Now, Gilad is a world-respected musician. And his talk, the interview and he has a lot of his friends here from all over the world. My life's journey from Jabotinsky revisionist family to wandering ex-Jew. So now I'm going to give the mic over to Gilad, and he's going to talk about his childhood and development and how he went from that to this. So, all right, I always like to do this. Today is Wednesday, May 19, 2021, in the Gregorian calendar, the 8th day of Sivan in the Hebrew Israelite calendar. I have to check Muharram in the Arabic calendar what it is. Oh yeah, by the way, I have 3 names. Lowell Joseph Gallin, that's my English name, which is Lowell Joseph, son of Meir. In Hebrew, that's Aryeh Yosef ben Meir. And in Arabic, it's Asad Yosef ibn Anwar. Don't think I figured that out myself. It was taught to me by a sheikh from Rome. Now, let's hand this over to Jason. So, excuse me, not Jason, to Gilad. And he's going to talk to us. Okay, here we go. Spotlight. Gilad.
Myself. Okay, I think that, I guess that everyone can hear me. I just unmuted myself. Great. Good evening, Israel. Good afternoon, Europe, and good afternoon, good morning, actually, America. I didn't realize that I'm going to give a talk, but I've given this talk or similar talks for quite a few years. I've been doing it, and I think that I changed my perspectives in the last few years over my so-called childhood and upbringing and my view of Zionism, or especially early Zionism. So the way I'm going to elaborate on this topic is not necessarily the way I was living my life through the events, but rather the retrospective view of those events that changed my life. So I was born in 1963, and as Lowell said, I am by origin. My grandfather was devoted and proud terrorist. He didn't see the difference between being terrorist or being a freedom fighter. He was a high commander in the Irgun, or what they call in Hebrew the Etzel. I was extremely happy as a child, and I was very proud of my country and very patriotic. I didn't have any issues with Israeli politics as a kid, obviously. But more than that, I had a great feeling that I was part of a very unique historical project. Now, this is something that most people who deal with Israel and Zionism and Palestine do not understand. As an Israeli born, and both my parents are Israeli born, they're actually Palestine born, they have a Palestinian birth certificate. And when it comes to my father family, they have longer history in the land. They are actually Palestinians, Jewish Palestinians. For people of my generation, Zionism was a cliche. It wasn't a real thing. It's something that belonged to the past. And it is very easy to explain. We saw ourselves as the successful products of the Zionist project. Zionism vowed to bring into life a Jewish state, or to erect a national home for the Jews, or whatever they want to call it. And this happened in 48, and it was a bit of a struggle. But from that moment, for Israeli-born people, Israelites, new Israelis, Hebrews, Sabra, how the Israeli called themselves, and we can elaborate about the meaning of this problematic notion. Sabras were not Zionists, they were Israelis. So those amongst us who felt for the land and were happy to fight for it and die for it, saw ourselves as Israeli patriots. I was looking forward to join the Israeli army. I was looking forward to have even a military career. I wasn't aware of the Palestinians and their cause until I was 16 or 17. Now, this is very peculiar because I was living in Jerusalem, so I saw a lot of Palestinians. But I noticed them, but I didn't see them. I definitely didn't listen to them. I definitely wasn't aware of their plight. When I was 17, as I was training, which is something that a lot of Israelis did at the time, and I think still do, as I was training for my military service. This is something that you start to do when you're 15. You want to be in kind of fit and in good health. I had an accident and I ended up in hospital for a very long time. And actually, this was the point where I picked the saxophone because I couldn't move for a year. And I actually didn't have to go to the army. And as embarrassing it may sound to some of my friends, and I see quite a few of them here, I actually volunteered to join the army because I had a serious, I suffered some serious injuries. And when I joined the army, I fought to raise my profile and to join the unit that I was planning to serve in. It didn't go very well because what happened then, as shortly after I raised my profile, I joined the Israeli army in 81, and in 82 was the first Lebanon War. And until that point, I tended to accept everything they told us about Israel, about Zionism, about Jewish suffering, about Israeli army being a defense force. And Lebanon War was definitely an expansionist war. We were not exactly defending ourselves. We were actually the instigators of a conflict that actually I didn't understand it then, but took many more years. And in fact, it is not resolved. And just before I went online with you guys, I heard that there were 4 or 5 rockets from Lebanon. The 4 or 5 rockets were shot in Lebanon and on Israel direction. I don't know what happened with that, because we start our conversation. As an Israeli soldier in Lebanon, I saw some things that changed my life. First, I saw some level of brutality, Israeli brutality, that I didn't want to be associated with. And the second thing that I started to see was a lot of refugee camps. And it landed on me that those refugees came from the land I tended to believe was mine. I tended to believe that it was mine because I never really questioned it. And I started to feel more and more uncomfortable with the Israeli military, with the idea of Israel being a Jewish state. And I'm going to elaborate on the idea of Jewish state in a second. And towards the end of my military service, I visited, I'm talking about a few weeks before I finished my military service, I visited Ansar in Lebanon. Ansar was supposed to be a kind of a POW camp, but the Palestinians didn't enjoy the status of a POW. The Israeli refused to give it to them, so it basically operated as a concentration camp. And when I go to Ansar in something like June '84, I saw something that literally made it clear to me that I've to terminate my relationship with Israel, with the Jewish state, and later also with the Jewish people. I mean, I have a lot of Jewish friends, but I don't identify myself as a Jew. What I saw in Ansar was something that nobody really speaks about it. I've never heard anyone speaking about it. And only when I visit Lebanon in 2015 or 16, my host took me to see that thing that I'm about to tell you about. So yeah, it's not a figment of my imagination. I was taken to a kind of a tourist tour in Ansar, and at a certain stage, we got to something that looked to me like a football yard, and there were 12 concrete cube, something like 1.20 meters long, 1 meter high, with 80, 90 centimeters, with metal doors. There were around a dozen, I don't remember how many, in a circle. And I told the commander, who was our tourist guide, I told him, listen, make sure that you don't put dogs. It was 42 degrees Celsius, and dog would die in 2-3 hours. And he told me, don't worry, these are not for dogs, these are for Palestinians. You put a Palestinian in one of those, they become Zionists within few hours. And then I looked closely and I saw a human hand hanging through this metal barrier. And I understood that this was the solitary confinement. I was pretty destroyed by it, I must admit. I finished my military service, like all Israelis. I've been a bit toured in Europe, been around the world, came back to attend Tel Aviv University. I, by then, also started my music career, and I did extremely well in Israel. And it was very clear to me that I would have to leave. By then, I started to understand that I was born in Israel many years before I realized that Israel was actually Palestine. I was born many years before I understood that Israel is a state. Palestine is the country. And I've never been a political person. I'm still not a political person at all. I never been a member of any political party. I never associated myself with any political party. I just realized that I was living on someone else's land. I was very troubled by it. And when in 93, 94, 92, 93, 94, I don't remember exactly when, I think that I was kind of approaching my 30s, I decided to do my master PhD somewhere else. I had few options and I ended up in England, which was an interesting experience. And I drifted away, and I knew that I had a very successful band in Israel. I came once or twice to do some very big concerts, but I didn't miss it that much. And I started to live in Britain, and I had a great career that developed immediately. This is something that I can say about the Brits. They're very, very welcoming. And in 2000, I went through a serious shift. There was the second Intifada, maybe 2000 to 2001. And I started to see images of my supposedly country, my own people, really behaving catastrophically bad. And I started to feel very, very troubled by it. And I really didn't have any major plan. I still don't have any major plan. I don't even know what I'll do tomorrow. But I decided that I definitely don't want to be identified with it. And I made it clear to people, listen, I'm an ex-Israeli. I then started to hear some people who were interested in my thoughts because I started to write about it. And I used to write for friends. I never I never sent my paper to the Guardian. I wrote few papers because I was by then trained as a philosopher and I could elaborate on some issues. And suddenly I found them in Counterpunch. I don't know who remember Counterpunch. It was a great magazine before it turned into a kosher punch. And I was one of their main writers. And a lot of people became very interested in my thoughts and the way I think about things. And even I, following them, I became fascinated with the way I think about things, and I started to write a lot. And my perspective was very different. I don't write about politics. I write about the meaning of the political process. I started to ask myself, what is happening in Israel? I realized that Israel became a Jewish state. And I will elaborate about it in a second, because this is really, really crucial. Because maybe Israel categorically saw itself as a Jewish state from 48, but Zionism initially was an anti-Jewish movement. The early Zionists promised to change the Jews, to make them into ordinary people, as they called it, to make them people like all other people. They accepted that there was something pretty problematic about Jewish diaspora identity. I'm talking about Herzl, about Nordor, about Ade Gordon, Bochov, all the streets in Tel Aviv. And I felt very comfortable with what they had to say about Jews and that which they promise to change the Jews into. I will elaborate it probably very soon, but I didn't understand it then, but I understand it now. I am the last early Zionist, the last one. And in a way, I managed to become an ordinary human being. I'm not a chosen. And why I stopped to be a chosen? Because when I started to think about Israel and Jewishness and Judaism and now all these things and Zionism, people told me, oh, you can speak about it because you're a Jew. I said, no, I'm not a Jew. I don't want to enjoy this privilege. So they told me, you're an Israeli. So I said, no, I'm an ex-Israeli. And I realized, and this is a topic for another meeting, if you'll still want to talk to me, that the main thing that I did in my philosophical study of Jewish identity, I realized that if Israel defined itself as a Jewish state, and definitely defined itself as a Jewish state now, the most important question is, or the most important questions are, who are the Jews? What is Judaism? What is Jewishness? And how those elements relate to each other and to Israeli politics, to Zionism, and so on, and so on, and so on. Once I started to ask these questions, the first people who started to attack me were not the Zionists, so to say, abroad. There are Zionists abroad. There are no Zionists in Israel. The first people who attacked me were the Jewish left. And then I realized that if I want to understand Jewish identity, I realized that at that time already that Jewish is a form of identification. It's not that they believe in God, they identify as Jews within the left, for instance, within the Palestinian Solidarity Movement. They are the key to the understanding of that which early Zionists found so troubling. They are the most problematic identity. And by the way, it is amazing to talk about it now because some of you, I guess, are Israelis. when you look at what is happening now in Israel, there is a huge conflict, blah, blah, blah. But just before the clashes started 2 weeks ago, we saw a very close emerging bond between the Orthodox Jews and the Muslim, the Israeli Muslim party, Mansour Abbas, and the Israeli left was left alone in a corner. There is nothing. It's a miniature thing. It's a miniature and idiotic and compromised thing. So I realized that actually Netanyahu gave the kosher certificate to a bond with an Israeli Islamic party, something that the left in Israel is not even close to achieve, which is very strange. However, I don't want to extend it too much. I understood that digging into the left is the best explanation for me of Jewish identitarianism. And obviously Jewish leftists were not happy with it at all. I realized that the solidarity movement is practically control opposition. It is set to divert the Palestinians from their cause. They will teach the Palestinians to talk about BDS, about colonialism. It's not colonialism. Israel is not colonial. It's a unique project. Everyone that studies Zionism understands that it's a unique project. Colonialism is a relationship between mother state and a settler state. It doesn't exist in the Zionist project or Israel. There is no mother state. The mother states are changing. It was Britain and it's America, and maybe next one it will be India or China. And there are some affairs with Russia as well at the moment. They cling to different terminology that is there to divert the Palestinians from their real cause. And the real cause is obviously the right of return, which, by the way, Hamas have managed to lead all those Palestinian divided groups and discourses, the West Bank and Fatah and Christians and Muslims and the diaspora and in the camps in the region. Hamas has managed to unite them all. But I'm going back to my understanding of myself in all this process, because this is what I'm supposed to talk about. It took me many more years to understand that the Israel I was born in may define itself at the time as a Jewish state, but it was actually an anti-Jewish entity. And this is something that a lot of people within the right claim, and they are right about it. Early Zionists were disgusted by association between Jewish and capitalism, for instance. We can think about Borochov, who spoke about society shaped as a triangle or as a pyramid, where you have a lot of working class, and then less people are middle class, and the top, the bourgeoisies are at the top. Borochov argues that the Jewish society is an upside down pyramid. You have maybe one guy who is going to work, many doctors, and a lot of bankers. This is Borochov, it's not Gilad Atzmon. And he said, our task to normalize the Jewish society is to turn this pyramid So it stands on the widest possible base. And at the time, doctors and intellectuals, Jewish intellectuals, and people who never walked in their life came to Palestine and find their way to the land, to the soil. Were exposed, they wanted to be rednecks. People look now at rednecks, but in the early Zionist dream, this was the ideal type of the new Hebrew. And I loved it. And I still love it. And then something happened and nobody understood it at the time. In 1977, Menachem Begin became the prime minister. And it is this point in time when Israel started to drift away from Israeliness into a Jewish state that regards itself as a Jewish state. The final move in this direction, and there are some papers written about it, I also published some papers about it, were achieved by Benjamin Netanyahu, who understood early in his political career, thanks to some studies that he made and people made on his behalf, that most Israelis are actually identify themselves primarily as Jews. And it was this point where Netanyahu himself, a secular guy from a secular family, made a clear bond with Jewishness and developed this path that led Israel into Jewishness, into a self-identification as a Jewish state. I realized in retrospective, when I look at my life, I was in love with the idea of Israeliness, with the idea that Jews can be normal people as opposed to chosen knights, normal people who work in the lands as opposed to people who work in banks, normal people who fight, and I'm offending some people, and I will elaborate on it, who fight, I will elaborate on it, who fight for what they believe in, as opposed to those who send other people to fight on their behalf. I left Israel in the 90s because I didn't want to become a Jew in a Jewish state. I thought that I will be able to accomplish and celebrate that early Zionist dream, this Israeliness in England. And by the way, I did. In England, I was free to talk. I was free to speak about all those things that I cared about. I was an ordinary human being. And then England started to go through a dramatic change. And I think that the peak of it was what we saw in the last few years in the Labour Party. It became a Jewish state. And it meant for me that I have to continue to wander so I can celebrate my Israeliness, so I can still elaborate on whatever I want to in any manner I want to, and be critical, because this is, for me, the Israeli ethos. And I just finished with a very important elaboration, and I wrote a book about it, and I never published it, but I will have to look at it now and publish it soon. As we know, Israel, as I mentioned a few times already, Israel was formed around the idea of the defiance of the diaspora Jew. So when Israeli leaves Israel, I don't know if we do it anymore, we call it Yored, descendant. When a Jew comes to immigrates to Israel, we call it Aliyah, ascending. Yeah, there is a clear hierarchy. I'll say it as if I'm still an Israeli, we saw ourselves as a very unique breed of people who managed to revolutionize themselves, went through a metamorphosis. Now, nobody in Israel in the 40s or in the 50s or in the 60s thought that this process would be swift or easy. We were actually entertained. I was 4 years old in 67, but I allow myself to say we. The difference between 4 years old in 67 and 10 years later, I don't know, going to the army is not that big in terms of history. We thought that it's going to be a very long process, and Israel had a lot of problems. There was austerity in the 50s. And then came the 67 war. And the 67 war was a shocking moment and basically a disaster. Why a disaster? It was a huge victory. Israel managed to destroy, to annihilate 4 Arab armies in 6 days. And the truth of the matter, that he did it in 4 hours. Through a blitzkrieg method. They started with the Israeli Air Force and actually followed this step by step, the blitzkrieg doctrine. You start with the Luftwaffe and you continue with the Panzers, and then comes the Wehrmacht. This is exactly what Israel did in 67. And guess what? They were better than the Germans. I'm not talking about now comparing Israel to Nazi Germany. It's a different, I'm talking about military tactics. They were better than the Germans. They defeated the Egyptian army, the Syrian army, the Jordanian army, and they consolidate the situation and got itself into a new state of a local or regional superpower. Why this was a disaster? This was a disaster because it put to an end the Zionist dream. The early Zionists thought of a long process, a long shift towards something deep and profound. One day after the 6-day war, the Israelis told to themselves, and they had a reason to do it, we don't have to keep changing. We made it. We made it. We are more Germans than the Germans. And if you look, by the way, sometime I show it in my talks, if you look The Israeli High Command, you look at the pictures of Ariel Sharon or Gazit or Talik, all those generals from 67, you look at them in their battlefield uniform, you think that you would think that this is the German army in Odessa. What I realized that between 67 to 73, 67 Six-Day War, 73 the Yom Kippur War, and 77 the Likud Begin becomes the prime minister, and this is practically the end of the revolutionary metamorphosis, the early Zionist philosophy. In these 10 years, Israel is moving away from being the state of the Israelis into a state of the Jews, driven by Jewish ideology that translates into chosenness, into supremacy, I'm afraid, becomes more and more racist. And I had myself less and less to do with it. I understood it intuitively in 82 when I saw the Lebanon War, what was happening in Lebanon. I understood it in the first Intifada. For me, the final breaking point was actually the Oslo Accord, believe it or not. When Oslo Accord, I assume that everybody knows what it is, so I don't have to explain. When there was this initial peace negotiation with the Palestinians, I realized that Israel is not going towards real reconciliation with the people on the land, real harmony. So I said, okay, we had a war, the war is over, let's live together. We already eat hummus, you learn how to eat gefilte fish, and we will marry each other and everything will be. This wasn't the Oslo Accord. The Oslo Accord was there to sustain the division on the land in which the Palestinians living in Gaza, in the camps in Lebanon. And for me, this was the end. I realized that it's not going towards peace. By the way, now it's almost 30 years since the Oslo Accord, and I wasn't wrong. And this was the moment when I left Israel, and in fact, never came back. I got very close. I've been on the Israeli border a few times in Lebanon, but I won't step my foot in this country until it is a state of its citizens and people respect each other as equal human beings. And I'm afraid that for that to happen, it will have to be Palestine. This is all for me at that stage. If anyone wants to ask me questions or to shout at me, bear in mind that I may enjoy it.
Yeah, I just unmuted everybody, so
all right. Gilad, can people hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So Gilad, I have a bunch of questions, but actually I'll try to constrain it to 3. First, thank you for the talk. It was very good, and I just want to say that I consider you to be a personal hero of mine.
Who am I talking to? I don't know.
Alexander.
Okay.
So I guess I'll just do question number 1, which is, so you mentioned that your grandfather was a terrorist, as you say. And I remember in another talk you gave, when you were talking about the Nabil test, you mentioned that your own father directly was a left-wing Israeli peace campaigner, or I guess an anti-Zionist Zionist, as you say. This is in a separate video.
I don't think that I ever. Okay. I know what you're referring. You're talking about the Nabil
Let's
text.
talk about Nabil. Let's talk about Avi. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if that's not the case, then the question evaporates, because I was going to ask, why did you, like, what do you think stopped you from going down the path of simply being, one of these sort of left-wing Israeli peaceniks who is still a Zionist, who says that they're not? My second question is, you mentioned that you grew up in Jerusalem and you were around Palestinians, but you didn't see them. And your shock moment was seeing with your own eyes refugees in Lebanon. But I'm wondering, looking back, is there anything you could have possibly told your 16-year-old self that would have, put him on the path that you're on now? Or was it simply a matter of seeing it? And then my third question is, what is your evaluation of the fact that Israel has not only declined, ethically in a way, but also militarily, in the sense that in 1967, you saw this excellent performance, better than the Germans, of the IDF in taking all these territories, but then, a failure to occupy Lebanon, a failure really to pacify Gaza, despite multiple ground engagements. So the three questions are, why did you not become an anti-Zionist Zionist? Like, what made you special? What made you different? What, if anything, could you have told your 16-year-old self to substitute for the things that you saw with your own eyes? And what do you think about the declining performance of the IDF forces on the ground over the past 50 years?
All right, great questions. I know what you refer to when I refer to my father. My father never been. I never describe him as a peacenik. Maybe he sees himself, but what I say in this paper that you are referring to, I think the piece about Jewish solidarity, the fake Jewish solidarity, which addresses your first question, actually, is that my father, for instance, would support peace and negotiation and all those things until you get to the point where you start to talk to him about the right of return. Actually, I didn't discuss it with my father in the last maybe 5 or 10 years, so maybe he changed his mind. But this is it's not my father. My father is just a prototype of an Israeli lefty or centrist, rational rational human being. This is to summarize it into one sentence, and I may repeat myself now. Some people heard me saying it. There is no Hebrew word for peace. The word shalom doesn't mean peace in modern Hebrew. It means security to the Jews or security for the Jews. It doesn't mean harmony. It doesn't mean living together and sharing bread. When Israel have shalom negotiation, is what it means is how to secure their borders and so on and so on. Okay, now I want to address your questions because they are superb. Why I'm not a peacenik, Israeli peacenik? Why I'm not an AZZ, anti-Zionist Zionist? Because I'm a jazz artist, and to be a musician, to be an artist, is to produce beauty. And when you produce beauty, you learn not to lie. The left, in general, unfortunately, though I agree with most of the fundamentals that leads to, I believe in equality, but the left, for different reasons, and I'm not going to get into it, and particularly Jewish left, is not an honest project. And when it comes to Jewish left, it is obvious, for the obvious reason, I repeat myself, that left is supposed to be universal, and we agree with it. Left is supposed to be something that is humanitarian and universal, but Jewishness is tribal. How can you be universal and tribal at the same time? it's like water and oil. So I don't want to take part in this project. Jewish left is for me an oxymoron. And for the Israelis that are listening to us, obviously I have nothing in common with this fanatic Israeli settler, Ben Gvir, but when it comes to the Israeli election, the only Israeli parties that promised to do something and delivered it were these ultra right-wing, like Ben Gvir and Smotrich. It's quite sad. It's quite sad, because I obviously agree with a lot of things to do with the left agenda. The only problem is that they don't believe in it. Okay. Why I didn't see Palestinians when I was 16?
Oh, no, sorry. The question was, what would you tell yourself? So what would you have told yourself when you were 16?
Yeah. In a way, I didn't have to tell myself anything, because I didn't see. And when I say that I didn't see, I of course I went with, to buy some falafel in East Jerusalem, and I would go and sit and eat watermelon with Balkan cheese, which is something that Israelis do, and I guess Palestinians, but nobody else understands it. But I saw them as people who, unlike us, I'm not justifying myself, I try to be honest about it, are lost. People with no direction. We had a direction. We were kind of in a process of metamorphosis. They were not good fighters. We looked down at them, which is awful. And I think that by now, at least myself, I learned to respect them. And it's not today or yesterday. And I think that by now, I listen a lot, I read a lot about 73 war, which was an amazing war. It's a war that Israel kind of reached this war in a state of total hubris and faced a total destruction. And, Moshe Dayan, who was the defense minister, thought that Israel was kind of going, about to disappear, and so on and so on. Many of the soldiers who fought in this war learned to respect the Arab soldier. And I think that 2 weeks ago, very few people in Israel remember that there was something like Palestine or Palestinian cause, and they look at them as something that is out there in the desert. And now I suggest that they learn to respect Hamas. What Hamas achieved yesterday is beyond belief. Since 1936, no one has managed to unite the Palestinians from the river to the sea. Yesterday, there was a general strike, like in 1936. And this is after 70 years of Israel trying to divide them, to make sure that they have nothing to do with each other. They are now a one fist of resistance. And they say, you can throw bombs on us, and we don't bow. Now, you asked me about Israeli military. One of the reasons that Hamas is so motivated, because Israel is not brave enough to enter Gaza. They're afraid. Israeli soldiers are afraid, and they know that if they enter Gaza, the next day there will be a lot of Jewish mothers on the border shouting on the generals. More than the generals are afraid, Israeli generals are afraid of losing in the battles. They are afraid of the Jewish mothers. Israel didn't win a single battle since 1967. It managed to destroy Beirut a few times, Gaza many times, but to win a battle, is to fulfill your military objectives. One of the reasons that the Israeli military didn't win is because they cannot even decide what are the military objectives. What is the military objective now in Gaza? There is no military objectives. The Palestinian Hamas has a very simple military objective. They say, we will present ourselves as the defender of Jerusalem. How do they do it? 5 rockets on Jerusalem. We present ourselves as the defender, as the unifier force of the Palestinians. They did it. What the Israelis enjoy is an incredible firepower that is 1,000 times more than the Hamas. They're way more advanced, but they cannot define a military objective. And this is something that they cannot do since '67. It is something pretty incredible. And this is why they're losing now. It is amazing for me because I monitor Israeli press every day, all day. The way they read the situation is astonishing. The Israelis are telling us that they want to end this round of violence, and we hear it every time, with an image of victory. For those of you who speak Hebrew, with tmunat nitzachon, image of victory. Not to win, not to be victorious, with an image of victory, which means that you can delude yourself with the thought that you won, or present an image of a satisfactory image that you can run for election and may win. This is not enough, obviously. And they always believe that what would achieve such an image of victory is increasing power of deterrence, so that the Arabs, the Palestinians, the Egyptians, so on and so on, will be deterred from launching any form of violence or attack or military attack, because they would understand the consequences. Here is the bad news. It works the other way around, completely the other way around. The Israelis said, okay, we didn't feel as if we won in Lebanon. We actually lost. The Israeli knows it. Hezbollah managed to defeat Israel in 2006, no doubt. It was so bad that Israel fired its chief of staff. What happened, really, but since then there was not been serious clashes with Lebanon in that scale. It's not because the Hezbollah is deterred, it's the other way around. The Hezbollah won. If you win, you don't want to go to another battle where you may lose. You want to sustain yourself as the victorious force. Exactly the same thing happened in '73. The Egyptian felt as if they won the battle, despite the fact that some military expert will argue otherwise. They believed that they won. They managed to nail the Israelis. They managed to cross the Suez Canal, and so on and so on and so on. This allowed them to reconcile. This is the peace accord with Israel. Syria didn't move forward. Why? Because Israel was stupid enough to push its forces as close as it can to Damascus, in order to humiliate Hafez Assad regime. So he never felt that he's ready for peace. If you want peace and reconciliation, you have to be very clever to leave your enemy room to reconcile with you. If you listen to a great hero of mine, Jesus Christ, he realized it. Turn the other cheek. This is the whole idea. Who is the most hated figure, or one of the most hated figure in the Jewish world? The word Yeshu, exploit Yeshu, is not Jesus' name in Hebrew. Yeshua was Jesus, the name for Jesus. He was born as Yeshua. The Jews call Yeshua, they change it to Yeshu, and one of the reasons is that it stands for, as an abbreviation, Imach Shmo Vezichro, may his name be erased, which is something that Jews use for Hitler, Imach Shmo Vezichro, Amalek, Imach Shmo Vezichro. All right? So this great man who tried to teach the Jews how to reconcile, turn the other cheek. Ended up on a cross. And I must admit that for me, one of the reasons that I cannot be an Israeli peacenik is because I feel more comfortable with Jesus than with JVP. And I feel more comfortable with Jesus' teaching, I mean, than anything the Jewish world could ever offer me. Sorry.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
I
I'm
just wanna
sorry, Lowell, you can go ahead. You can go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that you have so many wonderful people gathered with you, Gilad, that even when I will have to go and end the program after about the interview, the conversation, that doesn't mean you should stop. What I'll just do is assign hosting to someone else. So my recording will come through my concluding remarks for, well, thanks for everyone watching my show. And, but you will all be able to go on as long as you want. I just wanted to just make a note regarding Jesus. My background is in religion and theology, and I went to Quaker College at Swarthmore, where I have a special major in religion and the philosophy of science. And I was accepted to the Harvard Divinity School to do a master's in church history and theology. If you look in Luke 19, verse 27, Jesus speaking of his second coming in the parable says, look it up, Luke 19:27 says, all those who would not accept me as their king, bring them here and slaughter them in my presence. Now, most Christians and Jews don't even know that. And I've had people say to me, no, that's not true. You had a demonic vision, or it's not there, until I show them the verse. It's there. So there's a lot of stuff there. Jesus also says in Matthew 23, verses 1-3, the scribes and the Pharisees are the authorized interpreters of God's law. Therefore, listen to them and do what they tell you. So again, scriptures are only as good as the people who interpret them. And there's all sorts of stuff there. But I have my own question, which is, where did before I hand it over to the others, because I'll have to go in a few minutes, this is going to be an hour program. Where did your parents come from? What is the ethnic background of your own parents and grandparents? Where did they come from?
Okay, this is quite simple. Both my parents were born in Palestine in 38 and 39. And my mother's family came from East Europe. My grandfather was a very enthusiastic revisionist, Jabotinskyite. And as soon as he landed in Palestine, he was integrated into the high command of the Irgun. My father family, I guess, arrived in the region in the 19th century. So my grandfather's grandfather is buried in Mount Olive, I know because I went once with my grandfather as a kid to look for it. I think that he buried him there in 1929 at the night of the clashes. There were so, and he could never find where it was. So in 71 or 72, something that I remember as a kid, and I think that we found it was somewhere like near Intercontinental Hotel. If it's still Intercontinental, maybe not, I don't know. It's like almost 30 years that I didn't visit the country. But they also originally, they are not Arab Jews, but they are from East Europe, but and they came not because of Zionism, they kind of pre-Zionist. They came from, his grandfather wanted to be buried in Mount Olive or whatever. And it is very, very funny. Many years ago, maybe my father wouldn't be happy if I mention it. My grandfather spoke Arabic, and as far as I can remember, very, very well, which was very embarrassing for me as a kid, if you can believe it. So I would go with him in the old city of Jerusalem, and he would be completely fluent in the language. And despite him being European, they saw him as one of theirs. 20 years ago, a Jordanian friend who used to be a journalist for the BBC made a film about me, and she asked to see pictures of my childhood, and she saw my grandfather, and she said, who is this guy? And I thought, this is my grandfather. She said, no, it's impossible. I thought, why? I said, he's a Palestinian. And when after she said it, I looked at him, and I realized that he looks exactly like a Palestinian, the same kind of suit, and he would have this golden claw kind of attached to his trousers. And so she saw something that I couldn't see, but and I remember that as a kid, maybe I was a bit embarrassed about it. Again, why? Because it was very important for us to be Israeli, to be Hebrew speakers. So yeah, I think that I answered because I mentioned my father kind of maybe 2006 or 2007. I was in holiday with my parents, and my father told me, listen, I was born as a Palestinian. And he was then maybe kind of approaching his 70s, and his best friend is a Palestinian. And he said, and now I feel again that this is what I am. And my father was an engineer, and I asked him, okay, listen, if this is the case, would you go to work in Gaza building rockets? Because my father was in the aerospace industry, and my father told me, oh, I'm thinking that we won't go that far. I thought, maybe you are not a proper Palestinian yet. But I really appreciated the fact that he could go through this journey and see in his life from different perspectives. And even if it's not, he didn't do the whole journey, not that I did the whole journey, it's like, I think the journeys shouldn't come to an end. It's the most, as a musician, I know, you keep practicing. You never want to get there. I don't want to be John Coltrane. I want to try to become John Coltrane. Okay, I hope that this is a satisfying answer.
Yes, that was my question. That was all my questions got answered. So now it's everybody else's turn.
A question regarding the future of the Israeli society. From your talk, it was excellent, by the way, because it's all about the identity, definition of what is to be Jewish, and what is to be an Israeli. Now, my question to you is, how do you foresee, given all these cleavages that a society has, the Jewish identity has, also the Israeli society has, all these cleavages, how do you see the future? how do you see it based on your experience, and what is the actual, I don't know how to explain it, because you're going to give me your point of view. I want you also to draw from everybody's point of view of how they see the Israeli society.
Okay,
thank you.
So it's a great question. Unfortunately, I'm not a prophet. The one thing that I understood, and the one thing that I understood on a personal level, was that I myself, Gilad Atzmon, I didn't have a future in that society. I understood that I didn't have a future of peace with myself, living on someone else's land. Now, in my recent paper, I wrote that actually the fact that Zionism failed in achieving its goal, i.e., turning Jews into people like all other people, all the symptoms that Zionism promised to solve, to get the Jews out of the ghetto, to make them live with their neighbors, to enjoy the sun, to be workers, all those things that Zionism promised have evaporated. The walls around Israel are the biggest wall, ghetto walls in the world. The Chinese now coming to learn now in case they want to build another wall. This is my sense of humor that nobody laughs except myself. And every aspect that Zionism promised to change. It's a ultra capitalist country. There is nothing left of that sense of equality that was promised. This is something that I learned from Shlomo Zand. I wasn't aware of it until I read his work on the topic. The idea that the early Zionists, and he referred to Ben Gurion and Ben Zvi, who was, I think, the first president of Israel, until 29, they believed that the Palestinians will be integrated into the new Hebrew society, because they said they are the real original Jews. So the difference between us and them is that we have the blue shirts and they have the kafia, the scarf. Yeah, it's minor, and it didn't happen. In 29, they said no, it's probably not going to happen, and this is a big shift in the Zionist movement. So what I'm actually saying, I'm actually saying in my last paper, is that there is no collective way to solve the Jewish question. If you are a Jew and you are concerned with these issues, your only way around it is to deal with it on your own. And by the way, I feel exactly the same about COVID at the moment. I had some debates with my wife about it. She said, "Oh, we have to let people know." No, don't try to save the world. Save your kids. Save the people who you care about. Try to talk to them. There is no universal or collective solution for the Jewish question, or some people will say the Jewish problem. And why? Because once you start to think about something that is good for the Jews, you fall into the Zionist trap. And this is exactly where the Jewish left is. There is no difference between Zionists and Jewish left, maybe except the fact that Zionists are more genuine. Why there is no difference between Zionists and Jewish left? Because they both want to achieve what they believe to be good for the Jews. They just don't agree what is that thing that is good for the Jews. This is how I see it. So I'm not optimistic. I'm not optimistic. The only aspect that is, if there is positive development. It is something that must come from the Palestinians. And why? Because Islam and Christianity are universal precepts. It's not a coincidence that the kingmaker in Israel now, in Israeli politics, I don't know if they're probably going to another election, is Mansour Abbas, the leader of the Islamic Party. And it was his initiative. He stood up 1 month ago, 8 o'clock, prime time, Israeli TV, spoke in Hebrew to the Israelis and told them, listen, we are human beings. We have more in common than that which divide us. Let's move on. Let's build something. And by the way, the fact that he was so significant and that the Jewish Orthodox Party said, we prefer to sit with Mansour Abbas than with the Jewish left. This is the reason that the Israeli right-wing fanatic like Ben Gvir pushed Israel into the conflict that we are now. And this is, don't take it from me, the Israeli chief policeman, what they call in Hebrew, Mafkal HaMishtara, I think that we have some Israelis here. So he said it's this, we are in this crisis because of one person, Ben Gvir, and the Israeli minister in charge of the police was very upset by him saying it, but this is the truth.
So you see the Israeli society in the future marred by conflict, internal conflicts with the neighbor in perpetuity.
This is, I think that this is everybody agrees about it. At the moment, they are surrounded with animosity. Now, I thought about it today. Israel has a problem with its neighbors, with the indigenous people of the land, i.e. the Palestinians, with Lebanon, with Syria, which they attacked once a day now for 4 or 5 years. Yesterday, there was a drone coming from Jordan. We don't know what it is. There was already a conflict in the last few weeks with Jordan just before the election. And what it does, instead of seeking peace with the people, with its neighbors, it seeks peace with the most corrupted Arab countries out of the region, with the hope that they will be able to mount pressure on the Hamas, on the Lebanon, and so on, Jordan, and so on and so on. So again, they repeat every mistake that made their history into a chain of disasters. The first thing that Jews tell you is we suffered, our past was, the reason that I was so happy to be an Israeli, because the promise was that we change this idea of suffering on a daily basis. No more holocausts. And when you look at Israel, it is driving, self-inflicting serious issues on itself. Serious issues. What we see now is not good. Is not good. And it's not, I don't see any attempt to resolve it, which is very, 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 very sad, but not surprising.
One can accept that as long as the Israeli state is there. One can accept the fact that it's going to be a perpetual conflict with belligerents, internal, and accept it as a fact, because no solution could ever be applied where you have a complete peace.
By the way, it's not that there is no
internally.
Okay.
Internally and also externally.
Okay, I guess that we have to let other people. But it's not that there is no possible solution. I will give you the solution now in 2 minutes. No, not in 2 minutes. It's one sentence. If Israel wants to live in peace, Benjamin Netanyahu is to come tomorrow morning and say, I had an insight, I don't know, a bad dream, and I realized that we are living here on a land, on a disputed land. I realized that we ethnically cleanse a lot of people from this land, and for the future of me and my kids and my grandkids, Fadal, all the Palestinians, come home. We will find a way. That's it. This is the solution. There is one solution. I don't think that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to come with that tomorrow morning. It won't happen.
Gilad, I will have to go now. So what I'm going to do is, that doesn't mean that you have all these wonderful people who took the time to get together to talk to you, that has to stop. I went through 10 practice sessions with Zoom in June and July with my friend. There are theoretically a limited number of buttons to press. We kept pressing them. I figured out about 80% of them work. So I'm just going to say, to thank you. Just a minute, I'll say something, and then I will assign the program to you to host it, so you and your friends can continue as long as you like. But then I'll have a...
Yeah, by the way, I have another interview that I have to give later this afternoon, so we will probably do another half an hour. Because you know,
okay, so
yeah.
that's between you and them.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I'll put myself in speaker's view just for a moment. Right. Hi. I would like to thank our viewers and listeners worldwide in our live Zoom studio audience for participating in my first interview in almost 2 years. And I will conclude the program now. Gilad and his friends and colleagues will continue talking on their own. And very soon this will be up on my YouTube channel, and then with the link shared through my various internet portals. I actually destroyed my YouTube channel back in January to protest all their censorship. And then someone said, you cut off your nose to spite your face. How does that help anybody? If you go to BitChute or Rumble of the Moon, most people don't even know what that is. Yeah. So I said, you've got a point. So I re-added since August 2000, about 10 internet portals. So again, today is Wednesday, May 19th, 2021, the Gregorian calendar, 8 Sivan 5781 in the Hebrew Israelite calendar. I have to look up Muharram, I'm sure I mispronounced it. And I want to thank you for the moving, sharing your heart and soul, and you continue to do so, and I hope we'll meet again. So what I'm going to do now is end the meeting just for myself and transfer to you, assign and leave. So long, everybody, wherever you are, and until our next encounter.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm not so sure that I know what to do with it. Can anyone? Oh, you're all muted.
I'm not. Don't think I am.
Okay. Sorry. Hey, brother, how are you?
Hi, okay.
Okay, so so I'll. Okay. Is anyone wants to ask a question? Because I think I realize that I'm kind of the boss now. I've never been in this position. Okay, so I'm going to do something. I'm going to unmute everyone. Ask to unmute. Okay, I'm not sure that I know how to do it. Gilad Asmon, Jason. Can you, Devon? Can you Did
We can hear you.
okay,
and-
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
and we can also unmute ourselves. I'm muted just because I've got background noise in the house, so I'm muted.
Okay. Okay. No, I understand. I thought that I'm not becoming a
Yeah.
boss, and I didn't know what to do. Okay, so is there anyone wants to ask a question? I don't know. So you have to unmute yourself and ask a question, and if not, I probably don't have much more to say. I was expecting Zionists to chew me alive, and you are a Zionist. Dan, do you want to ask something?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you see any connection between the rise of identity politics and more of an authoritarian government, a tendency here in the West, both in America and in Europe, and the rise of more authoritarianism and identity politics in Israel.
Of course. I think that identity politics is primarily a Jewish thing. And the reason that Jews are so good in identity politics, and they are in the center, you find this is something that I usually people don't know, and because I don't speak a lot about it. When I realized that Jewishness is an identitarian thing, and obviously I didn't know much about identity politics, I started to read gay readers, lesbian politics readers, my band, my quartet on the road. It's all the time going through a transition. Say, Gilad, what do you read? You know, they see me reading kind of a gay text and so on and so on. And what shocked me that every time I bought kind of a reader, 90% of the names were Jewish names. And for instance, I wrote a very strong paper about the role of Purim and the book of Esther in defining the Jewish psychic, and people were very impressed because I made a comparison between AIPAC and the book of Esther. The truth of the matter is that I found the idea in a lesbian gay politic identitarian text, and the idea was that we women, we all have to be like Esther. All right, so it is very clear that Jews are at the center of identitarianism, and they are way better than anyone else because Jews are doing it for 2,500 years, while LGBT are doing it for 15 years. Feminists are doing it for 60, 70 years, late 19th century, we see it. Black are doing it since the 60s, or so on and so on and so on. Now, another very important thing about identitarianism is, to a certain extent, politics that is defined by biology. So you are defined by your skin color, by your gender, by your sexual preference, by the blood of your mom, if you are a Jew. And the most embarrassing thing is that politics that is defined by biology is the biggest problem with Hitler. This is exactly what Hitler introduced to Western politics. The problem with fascism, with the German fascism, is not that combination between nationalism and socialism. You can have socialism of one state. This is not a problem. Equality of one state, or equality of those people who speak German, this is not a problem. Equality of one race is the problem. Now, if Hitler is a problem, and I have big issue with racism, it is quite sad to admit that Zionism was there 3 decades before. This identitarian politics being defined politically by your race is something that Zionism predates Nazism by 3 decades. We spoke before about, there was a gentleman, Alexander, I think, that asked me why I don't morph into a AZZ, into a Jewish lefty. Because I don't want to do politics that is defined by my race. I want to be ordinary, as Zionists promised me to become. Okay, so they definitely we see Jewish identitarianism in this in the center of the identitarian of the identitarian shift. Now, when it comes to Israel, it is very interesting. One of the reasons that the Israeli left evaporated completely is because if it had something to offer to the Palestinians, the Israeli conflict, Meretz, for those who don't know, Meretz is the Israeli kind of left party. Meretz is now an LGBTQ party. It moved into this avenue, and it actually drifted away from the Palestinian, Israeli-Palestinians reconciliation discourse. And I don't have any doubt that the rise of authoritarianism that we see in the West, and obviously in Israel, on every possible issue. Your internet connection is down. I hope that everyone can, I just got that. I hope that my internet is still recording. All right. The shift that we see in Israel and all over the world is very, very problematic, and it's something that we see also with COVID. And I'm reading actually at the moment an Israeli text about it, and it is quite shocking for me. I'm aware of this Israeli intellectual. I never met him, but we always kind of walk in a very similar, however parallel lines. And he's talking about the collapse of democracy or democratic sense or democratic ethos. I'm talking about Gadi Taub. Are you Israeli? Dan, are you Israeli?
I'm
yeah. So
no, I'm not.
You're not. All right. So he speaks about the conflict between the people who are somewhere, which is what used to be the working class, and the people who are anywhere, which is basically the intellectual, financial elite. They can move from, you can work from everywhere and move to everywhere and operating in English and so on and so on. The issue here is that for the anywhere people, democracy is a problem. They would like to see the nation state evaporating, and one way to do it is to push us into more and more authoritarian regimes, and the way to handle it is to divide us. If the left in the old days used to unite us together, said we're all together, it doesn't matter if you're a man, a woman, a lesbian, black, Jew, we were all together. Now we are divided by skin color, by gender, by sexual orientation. Everything that can divide us is there to divide us. So we are subject to this tribalization. And this is exactly the idea of the 12th tribe of Israel. So you see a Jewification of the universe. To summarize it, I always argue that what we see is a battle, vicious battle between Athens and Jerusalem. Athens is the birthplace of philosophy. Jerusalem is the birthplace of the revelation. You don't think you get the rules, you get the mitzvot, you get the commandments. Athens taught us how to think for ourselves. Jerusalem teaches us how to say the right thing. We are now under the authority of Jerusalem, and it's not easy, and it's a big war, and it may be possible that that we won't be able to emancipate ourselves, and we are entering a very long and dark chapter, dark ages, let's say. All right. Yeah, sorry.
May I just say one thing? I think that you are a prophet, and I don't think that telling the future in detail is the role of prophecy as much as it is describing things that really are and rationally looking at how things are developing and being able to see where things are heading. And that's something that Jesus did.
There is very kind. I tell you exactly what I am. I'm not an activist. And I despise activists, although some of my best friends are activists. Yeah, but I despise the idea of activism. Activists always know what is right and who is wrong. Philosophers refine questions. This is what I'm doing. When there is an issue, where there is a problem, I try to ask the right questions, to elaborate, to understand the meaning of the terms that are fundamental to a discourse. And I find out that once I go into this journey, I always learn more and more about the prospects, about the possibilities, and I become sometimes more clever than others in seeing things that people struggle to see on their own. But once I mention it, they admit that they actually saw it all the time but didn't notice it. It's exactly what happened to me with the Palestinian kids around me. It's not that I didn't see them, I didn't notice them.
Gilad, I have a slightly different point of view from you.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I have a slightly different point of view on the identity politics question. I would agree that identity politics has very much been promoted by Jews as a form of protection, I would say, as a form of defense. If you promote identity politics, then you undermine the sense of national identity.
I agree.
And I think we agree on that.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you put in the authoritarianism, authoritarian type rule, as if it was sort of along with identity politics as one of the things that Jews have promoted. I would have thought, it may be that as well, but I would have thought that there's a degree of people turning to authoritarianism in order to re-establish national identity as a protection against the division of society that has resulted from identity politics.
I would agree that this is a possibility. When people they don't call it authoritarianism, when they want to term it in positive terms, they would refer to strong government. We need strong government. What they mean by strong government is a big Führer, a big leader that will take responsibility and so on and so on. I think that what we mean by authoritarianism now, and this is how I interpreted the question, is tyranny of correctness. And tyranny of correctness is fundamentally a left thing.
Yeah,
It is.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, it's and I think that this is what we
disaster.
yeah, and this is and it comes when I looked into it. So it is possible that the origin of it is in party politics, Stalinism, Leninism, dictatorship of the proletariat. But when you dig further, you find out that this is really the meaning of Jerusalem. This is really the meaning of this is really the meaning of Jerusalem. The idea of revelation, of mitzvot. You may even do the most irrational thing, but this is a mitzvah. This is how you approve, you make sure that God see the purity of your belief if you do the most stupid thing. All right?
Yes, no, I'm not quite, because I think that reason can be overrated.
I'm with you. I'm not. Very excited by irrationalism. I'm a jazz musician, and the way I teach music is not to operate. And this is a dispute that I run with a lot of other educators that try to teach people how to play licks, and I try to make sure that people can close their eyes and the music happens by itself, not as a rational development, as an unconscious.
Yeah, the thing that I'm getting to is that it seems to me more and more, the more I think about it, that actually people believe what they want to believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we're all Jerusalemites.
Yeah, listen, you see it very strongly in Israel. There is something amazing, that I thought about. Israel is now getting thousands of rockets a week. It was something like 200 rockets a day or something like that. In 73 war, the Egyptian army, the big Egyptian army that gained a lot of achievements in the first few days in the Suez Canal. The same applied to the Syrian army that literally could continue riding the tanks to Tiberia and the Sea of Galilee and Haifa. They didn't dare using rockets against Israeli cities. There were a few rockets from Syria that dropped in an Israeli Air Force base in the north of Israel. Yeah. The first one who dared doing it was Saddam. And we were talking about 5, 10 rockets a night. Now it's a full barrage. It's a full barrage. And one would have thought that the Israelis would be devastated by it. They are actually very, very, they are in complete denial. They are in complete denial. The worse the situation becomes, the less they are willing to look into it. It is very, very fascinating, and this is the benefit of being irrational. It's a defense mechanism. It's very, very interesting. Anyway, great to see you. Great to see you. I didn't see you for quite a while. Anyway, it's funny because we are probably the closest now. I'm kind of just, 40, 50 miles from you, and we struggle with the internet. It's funny. Any more questions? Because if not, I can see that Press TV are asking me for an interview, and I have another one with Jason, whom I saw here early on. And so I can take one more question, but then I'll have to leave if anyone wants.
Okay, Gilad, I'll take the last question spot.
Okay.
My question is, have you read a book called Uncomfortable Questions for Comfortable Jews by Meir Kahane?
No, I didn't, but I looked into the work of Meir Kahane and was fascinated by it. Not because I agree with him, obviously, but because he was very honest. And the most shocking thing about Meir Kahane, that was regarded in the 70s as a hardcore Jewish racist lunatic, the most amazing thing, that the vast majority of Israeli politics is now consistent with Kahane fundamentals. So I didn't read this book. I looked into some of his texts. I looked into his prophecy, and I recommend everyone to look at the very interesting debate between Meir Kahane and Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz tried at the time to pretend to be the humanist Jew. And actually, Kahane minced him to pieces. And fascinatingly enough, Alan Dershowitz is, I believe, not too far from where Kahane was in the 70s.
Wouldn't you think the change that have occurred in people who were leftists, the change that have that you said that they shifted all toward the Kahane, ideology of one Israel, Jewish, and expel all the Arabs? Wouldn't you believe that the change occurred because of the experience that Israel have with the Arab neighbors, not accepting the Jewish state, and so on? So don't you think it's people are moving toward the Kahane ideology? It's because they have seen through all the history, through all the negotiation, that nothing can come out of nothing, no peace will arrive at whatsoever. And that's why people are becoming more and more hardliners.
I think,
so
I
don't
think
you think it is true or not?
I think that it is very, very simple. It's really, really simple. The right wing Israeli stroke Jewish ideology is consistent. All right, it is consistent. Kahane said, "What does it mean? We call ourselves a Jewish state, but we don't follow Judaism. So tell me, what is Judaism?" The Israeli Orthodox, Shach, Halacha, they say, "So we are Jewish state, but we don't follow the Halacha. So what Jewish about it? As the race? So we are a race state." All right. So all those concepts that the Israeli Jewish right wing are presenting are totally consistent. I don't say that they're ethical. They're definitely not universal. They're not humanist. They are consistent. The Israeli left is extremely inconsistent. To start with, Jewish left is oxymoron. I explained before. If left is universal and Jewish is tribal, Jewish left is universal tribal. Impossible. It's nonsense. It is there to delude the Goyim. It's there to delude the Labour Party. It's there to delude the most stupid Jeremy Corbyn, who fell into this trap. And I tell you something else. Israeli right-wing state in the Israeli Knesset, not now because the party split, but in the previous Knesset, the third biggest party was the Arab United List. I'm not lying. Show me the Arabs in JVP board. No, you cannot be in JVP unless you are a Jew. You cannot be on the board. So the Jewish anti-Zionist left is racially exclusive, and Israel, the so-called racist country, is more inclusive than the anti-Zionists. So I'm saying it for years. And it's very bad and it's very sad. I don't agree with Zionists. I don't agree with Israeli patriots, but I understand what they're saying. I may have a lot in common with Max Blumenthal, but he's duplicitous inside out. You know, he's a person who speaks against racism while operating within Jewish groups. He, for instance, wrote a letter against me, a Jewish letter, which means that if you are not a Jew, assuming that you are not a Jew and you are against me, you can protest against me, but you cannot protest me against me within a Jewish letter with Max Blumenthal. What kind of leftists are racially exclusive? Can you think of any? No. Just the Jews, in the Jews for Corbyn, in the Labour Party. What was the name? Labour Voice of Jews, Jews Voice for Labour, I don't know. Yeah. These are groups that say you cannot join us unless you are a Jew. Would Corbyn would accept in his proximity people that call themselves white for Corbyn or Aryan for Corbyn? No, but the foolish guy accepted Jews for Corbyn. So this is the left. So it's not just Jewish left. The left is full with contradictions, and this is why the labor is collapsing. This is why Jewish left is now in Israel it's a marginal caricature. This is what it is. It's very bad. It's very bad, and I think that we deserve something slightly better. Anyway, it was great to talk to you all. I have to take a break because I have another interview very soon, that will be also very long. And maybe we should. It was so easy to do it. I just put something on Facebook. Maybe we should do it more regularly. And I was expected. I thought that I will meet a lot of opposition, and I didn't. Not that I miss it, but I like opposition. It makes me think. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.